typically the market slows down in December. So if you do have a place that's up for rent, don't fret. If your phone hasn't been ringing, it's quite typical for both the sales side and the rental side to slow down because people start thinking about families coming into town, Christmas dinners, all this sorts of stuff like that. And moving is sort of on the back burner. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. We are in December, the final stats for this year, 2025. So let's get into it real quick. The Bank of Canada has held their interest rate at 2.25. So what does this mean as far as the sales and the rental market goes? Absolutely nothing. Basically, it seems that everyone is essentially hanging out to see what happens in the new year. And essentially, this will wash into the rental market. Basically, nobody's going to move for the time being as far as purchases go, which means that there won't be any displacement for the tenants. And therefore, everybody essentially stays still and the rents may actually keep on decreasing since nobody's actually moving around. So along with the sales side of places building up more and more and more, the rental side has the same thing, creating more vacancies. And basically, we're just going to coast until next year to see what happens. Looking over the past year, the rents have been gradually going down with an average from anywhere from 5% to 12%, depending on the area and the sub area. So speaking of sub areas, if it's Burnaby, is it Burnaby North or Burnaby South, etc. So that's why there's a bit of a range on that. But overall, they have been gradually decreasing. So that's kind of where we are for right now. The typical of Vancouver and suburbs, the suburbs obviously are going down a little bit more. There's a cheaper rent always in the suburbs than it is downtown core. Nothing unusual. So that's basically where we're at. So currently, the unfurnished one-bedroom units, which is what we use for our baseline, went down $44 from last month, November 2025, to this month, December 2025. And year over year, it has been a $177 drop on average for the unfurnished one-bedroom unit in Greater Vancouver. Now, the reason why we use the unfurnished one-bedrooms as the baseline is because obviously furnished and two-bedroom and three-bedroom and so on will obviously hold a higher value than the one-bedroom units. So that's how we use the baseline, and you can do your calculations from there or talk to a professional. Then you'll be able to get a better insight as to what the rents would look like in your specific area and how to arrive at a competitive rental number. So typically the market slows down in December. So if you do have a place that's up for rent, don't fret. If your phone hasn't been ringing, it's quite typical for both the sales side and the rental side to slow down because people start thinking about families coming into town, Christmas dinners, all this sorts of stuff like that. And moving is sort of on the back burner. However, if your place has not been rented as of yet, and you are wanting to get it rented, obviously, in the new year, now's the time to take a solid look at what's been happening. So has your phone not been ringing for the past 3 weeks or so? It's probably your price because we are in a softer market, of course. And you may want to consider revamping your photos, maybe update your write-up, take down the ad and put it up again so that it's a brand new, fresh ad. And the reason why is that because typically there's a blip of activity in the first weeks of January. The reason for this is, generally speaking, this is where people go and announce engagements, having kids, making decisions on the buying side to no longer rent, these sorts of things. So if you have a vacant home for rent, now might be the time to do the adjustments that you need so that when people are making these big family announcements at Christmas dinner, that they'll be looking at your place when they start to put that into action, looking for the two-bedroom now that they have the kid, and so on and so forth. So that is basically the moves that you need to do right now to deal with what is going on in the rental side. Now, speaking of people making changes, a lot of property managers have been receiving notices to move. What needs to happen here to try to protect yourself from a vacancy is when you receive that notice or somebody calling from another property doing a background check on your current tenant, is to maybe consider offering a price reduction to your current tenant. The reason why you want to do this is because, as I had mentioned before and in previous shows, we are in a bit of a slower and colder market. So if you have a vacancy, you may have a vacancy for a few months. You may have to find a tenant paying lower. And if you've got a good working relationship with your tenant, you may want to just stick with that and have a good working relationship. Additionally, the increase that you can get back following year may be of benefit, and therefore, if you reduce your rent, you may make it up in the following year. A simple example on a $2,000 rent is that if you reduced it $50, on the rent increase, you'll get that back. So, doing your comparison between vacancy or non-vacancy over $50, you do the math, probably better off to just work with the tenant that you currently have, and then you can make it up later over risking having a vacancy and having a lower rent once you find a new tenant who may or may not be as good or favorable as the current tenant you have. Almost like knowing the devil that you do. Speaking of which, the prescribed rent increase for next year, for 2026, is 2.3%. As mentioned earlier, the market is quite soft. So if you are going to go raise your rent on your current tenants, make sure that you check around to see what's happening in your area for comparable units, because you may end up driving your good tenant away. So make sure that you look before you leap, because otherwise you may end up shooting yourself in the foot and you'll end up with tenants that have left. Currently, the top least expensive places to rent a one-bedroom unfurnished in the Lower Mainland is New Westminster at number 3, Langley at number 2, and Surrey, unsurprisingly, at number 1. The reason why I say Surrey unsurprisingly is because Surrey has a heap of properties available due to new builds, due to the location around SFU and UBC campuses at Surrey Central in particular, and also due to the fact that Canada has less international student visas and therefore less international students, which is who is generally renting these areas around Central City in Surrey. So basically, if you're looking for a least expensive rent, Surrey is the place to go. And it's also been a little bit trickier to get the ones rented that are currently available. So if you are struggling out there, you are not alone. So let's get into the mailbag. The mailbag this week is empty. No problem though, because I did have a call from a DIY landlord that was asking some questions about notice. In particular, how to serve them and how long it takes, because there are rules surrounding giving notice. In fact, a 24-hour notice is definitely not 24 hours. So a couple of points to keep track of. One, that email is not considered instant. We all assume that it is, but it is not. So do take into account that the email does apply with these following dates to receive a notice. So in person is the only way that it is actual notice instant received. So if you're giving a 24-hour notice and you give it to the person, it's considered received and you can go in 24 hours. But in most cases, people mail them, email, etc. So going through the other more common ways, email service, posted on the door, or fax, not that anyone uses a fax machine anymore, but it still counts, is considered received on the third day after it is posted. And if you're using regular mail or registered mail, it's considered received on the 5th day after you have posted that. Now, to give an example, it is the day that you post does not count. So if you were going to email a 24-hour notice, then you would email it on the 1st, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and then the 5th is when you could go in for your 24-hour notice. Apply that to the 5 days, etc., etc. But the easy rule of thumb is that it has to be the full 24 hours for each day that it is, and the one that you are posting it on or delivering the notice does not count. So 1 is dead, 2, 3, 4, 5 if you're going to a 5-day. So just keep that in mind when you're doing that, just so that you don't end up getting in some trouble for coming in early, infringing on your tenant's rights, and so on and so forth. And another one that is a major concern, because a lot of people are, fairly loose on the do-it-yourself way, social media does not count. So if you message them on Facebook or on Instagram or whatever social media you're using, it's non-existent. It does not count in the eyes of any residential tenancy branch arbitrator. So make sure that you use the prescribed methods. I will have a link in the description below so that you can check that out and have an easy way to check and make sure that you're doing everything by the book, because you don't want to end up getting yourself into a whole bunch of trouble. So this has been the stats for December 2025. Thank you for listening, and thank you for tuning in for this past year. We really enjoyed having you here, and we'll be back later on next year, of course, to cover everything that is property management and investment in Greater Vancouver area. My name is Hayes. This has been Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast.